Out of all of the buttons you could possibly press in a game of Supervive, powers are arguably the most powerful given the right situation. The craziest thing though is that a lot of players, both new and experienced, don't know how they all work or forget to use them in the first place. So this guide today aims to fix that. But before we do that, hey, my name is Paz, currently ranked 7th place on the Supervive leaderboard, and if I can teach you about all the powers, I'm pretty confident I can teach you about a lot of other things in Supervive. So stick around and subscribe to the channel if you learn anything. All right, let's get into it. First off, let's cover the basics. What even is a power? Powers are unique abilities that any character can utilize when they are picked up around the map. There are currently 2 types of powers: active and passive powers. Active powers give you an extra button, I like to say. In other words, they unlock a new ability for you to use yourself. Contrast this with a passive power that is always doing something for you depending on the power. No button is required to press to make it work, it just works. No passives are better than actives and vice versa. It all depends on the situation, which I really like. Powers also have a multitude of rarities as follows: gray, green, blue, purple, and red. This matters because it influences how they are going to spawn around the map. Most powers can spawn in vaults around the map that can be opened by lockpicking them. Red powers do not spawn in vaults though. However, they can be found when opening red chests after eliminating teams, as well as Night 1 bosses when they are defeated in Vane Grove and Prisma Falls. There are some exceptions to this rule based on specific instances and storm shifts, but for the most part, this is a pretty good rule to follow. Specific powers can also spawn from red biome bosses after you clear out all of the mobs in each specific named location. Different biome bosses are going to drop different powers. This can be really good to know if you need a specific power to make your character work. The last way you can get powers outside of eliminating enemies and stealing them is to complete a most wanted quest that drops 1 random power, but that is pretty niche. All right, now that we know what powers generally do and where to find them, let's review each and every power to see how they work, starting from the gray rarity, moving all the way up to the red. Quick disclaimer though, certain powers we talk about may get switched in and out of rotation as the game ages. Don't be alarmed if a power we talk about today isn't in the pool. All the current powers in the game will be in the Learn tab in the game, so if you really want to know exactly what you're getting into, just take a look at all the powers there before you play the game. The gray powers are made up of passive stat runes. The runes include ability haste, mana, movement that I believe has been taken out of the game, and omnivamp. These are all pretty self-explanatory. They give you the same thing the rune says it does. In terms of the potency of them, they are alright. Certainly good if you have no other options, but most powers are worth picking up over them. Moving on to green powers, we have the Creep Cloner, otherwise known as the Pokeball. Upon throwing the ball by holding, any low-level creeps in its radius will be picked up for you to later tap the power keybind to throw them out to attack your enemies. This power is super fun and can be used for so many different things. Jellyfish give you essentially a permanent jump pad, and all creeps give you vision on an area on top of extra damage. This power is slept on in both the fun and value departments. Next up, we have the Emergency Platform, which can be placed over the abyss or hazards like water to give you a safe place to stand on that also gives vision and refills your glider fuel. This power is super fun when the circle ends up partially over the abyss, but other than that, it's kinda just whatever. Bush campers rejoice, we have Ghillie Suit up next. Upon using this power, the player becomes a bush moving extremely slowly, but as a bush. But the prop hunt extravaganza doesn't stop there. You can also turn yourself into a tree with tree costume. This one is kind of OP, and I've actually juked some people with this power. It's just good fun. Some other powers actually have strong synergy with the prop hunt powers, but more on that later. Speaking of trees, Friend of the Forest gives you extra mana regen when standing next to trees. Yeah, to be honest, it's just kind of whatever, and I have nothing more to say. It's kind of just a sad power if you ask me. Forest walking is a passive power that lets the player walk through trees, super situational, and yeah, kinda sad again. I need a pick-me-up. If becoming the bush isn't your style, and you would rather be one with the bushes, then the green power for you is Green Thumb. Green Thumb instantly spawns bushes around the player, effectively giving your team invisibility in a small area. This is a component of the infamous Berry Eater Green Thumb combo that we will talk about later. So even though it is a green power, it is pretty damn good all things considered. All right, now that the prop hunt powers are out of the way, way, let's talk about Jammer. It's a simple passive power that makes you go unseen when an enemy team hits a radar on the map. I like this power when the Storm Shift is global UAVs specifically. Next up, we have Mana Cloud, which is actually pretty useful. Upon using the power, it spawns a mana cloud behind you that your entire team can use to regenerate mana throughout the game. It despawns after 15 seconds, but is super useful if you find yourself taking a lot of fights without a mana item. Another power that spawns fields around you is Burning Core. Upon activating the power, the player spawns a flaming zone around them every 2 seconds that deals damage over time to all enemies within its radius within a maximum of 3 zones that grow larger each zone you proc. The fire cannot spawn on water, and enemies that do touch water immediately stop burning as well. Burning Core isn't the best option, but it isn't the worst either. I don't mind having it, but I'm not ecstatic when I have it either. If burning the world down isn't your cup of tea and you'd rather payphone out near water, look no further than the old trusty fishing pole that can fish out consumables from the water after a very, very long time. You can also fish consumables out of enemy players as well as teammates if you want to troll them, which honestly might be the most fun part of the power. Who doesn't like trolling their friends? I don't think the fishing pole is horrible. It's just a little hard to use and you'd get a lot more out of other powers. The devs must be Kendrick Lamar fans with the next power though, the Money Tree Grenade. Using the power throws a seed that grows a tree instantly that drops a little bit of gold when it is felled. There are 3 charges it holds at once, each with their own cooldowns like Tracer's Blink in Overwatch. The true value of this power comes from its hidden versatility. It can be used to block off certain pieces of terrain, but it can also be used with Bishop's Punch or the Iron Fist power to punch trees into enemies consistently. Super handy. Another power that synergizes really well with the Money Tree Grenade is the Throwing Axe. Upon using the power, the player throws out an axe that fells the first tree that it hits, stunning any players in a generous cone. The power is kind of whatever on its own, but when you add it with another power into the mix to synergize with, it starts getting pretty good. Plus, it is an absolute blast to use. Next, we have another passive green power, Scuba Gear. While you have the power in your inventory, you no longer get slowed in water, but you also become invisible while out of combat. This power is really dependent on where you are, and even then, it is just kind of whatever because it is really hard to get 4 of them for your entire team, but it's pretty intuitive. Closing out the green powers, we have Instant Vive. Upon using this power in water, the bottle produces a boatload of Vive Brew and Hyper Vive for your whole team to pick up. It even works outside of water, but it produces at a much lower rate and then goes on a much longer cooldown as a result. I actually really like this power as it can get your whole team back into the game if you need to revive teammates, but there again are better options. Starting up the blue powers, we have the Chonker. The Chonker is a classic power that shoots out a huge chonky boulder cat after a charge up timer that slowly rolls at enemies and stuns them if contact is made. This is powerful enough to stop some characters in their ultimates, but it can be pretty hard to whip out in the moment. Now, the Chonker is not to be confused with the Chonker Cannon, a purple power that can be deployed to continuously fire Chonkers in a straight line. While it is harder to aim with a Chonker Cannon in the middle of a fight, the cannon can be really strong when you're trying to hold a late game position, so do not sleep on the Chonker Cannon and make sure you make that distinction. Running out of mana sucks in Supervive, but the delicate mana battery negates that problem. This passive power regenerates your mana quite quickly when you're at full health, which can be very useful. Next up, we have the Bloodstone. This power used to be insane, but now it's just kind of whatever. On activation, you take 400 damage and then replace that with a 400 HP shield, gaining 13% Omnivamp. The problem is that Omnivamp is kind of a fake stat since anti-heal is so common in the game. That being said, if you can manage to avoid anti-heal, maybe I'm the one sleeping on this power. The fan favorite Raven Spy is an excellent power to give your team vision, especially in areas that are very dense with trees like Vanegrove, for example. The Ravens can be placed on the ground as well, they just grant less vision. Once you put Ravens down, you can hold the power key to launch them at enemies, dealing 140 damage each. If you can manage to find Raven Spy before Night 1 bosses, they can practically guarantee that you get them safely or at least you don't get jumped on, which is super nice. What used to be horrible is now kind of decent, and that is the homing missile. First, the player sets a mark on the ground, and then on the second activation, the player revs up a missile that homes in on the location. You can aim away from the home in location that creates some wild wonky flight paths that will possibly take enemies by surprise and land you some kills, especially over the abyss. This power still isn't super great, but damn is it fun. Give it a try, it might not be that bad for you. A super slept on power is the Rescue Turtle, probably because it can be super confusing to use for new players and vets alike. When using the power, power, the player sits down a small zone that lasts for 15 seconds and pulls an ally towards the user while also healing them for 600 HP. This pulls through obstacles and pulls wisps as well. But that isn't the only crazy part. You can use this on an engaging character like Felix or Oath to pull people into the fight when they channel their ultimates. So for example, you can put down your rescue turtle, run in, and then tell your Celeste to fly in with the turtle while ulting, freezing the entire enemy team. Pretty cool, right? Honestly, the more I use this power, the better I think it is, so get comfortable using the turtle. Speaking of slept on powers, we have Brush Boar that places a friendly boar on the ground that stuns enemies on contact. If you use the power while in a bush, the boar is not just placed, and rather it charges out at your enemies. I really like this power because it makes fights more interesting and gives your enemies more to think about on top of acting like a wall if you're an Oath player. That means you can bash people into the boar and effectively infinitely stun them. If you would rather use bushes for super speed and stealth though, look no further than the passive power, Brushwhacker. Once leaving a bush, you will move a decent bit faster while being invisible for 5 seconds. It's not the worst power, but it's not great either. What is cool is that you can combo this with the ghillie suit, the one prop punt power that we were talking about before, to ambush your enemies. Not the best power, but really funny. If bushes aren't your thing altogether and you just want to blast your opponents, the mortar power is the one for you. By holding the power, you can rev up a mortar shot that goes further the more that you hold in before firing. It does 750 explosive damage to enemies in the target area, but it is really easy to dodge. The power shines when zones are super small and enemies literally cannot move out of its radius, or if you find yourself in a close range engagement and need just a little bit more space to play around the mortar circle. If water is super annoying for you and you can't manage to find some scuba gear, Rally is a really good option. Upon using the power, you and nearby teammates walk faster and ignore hazards for a short duration. This power is super strong for taking out the Night 1 boss near Prisma Falls, as well as if the circle ends in Mage Bog. Ever want to punch people like Bishop, but want to play anything but Bishop? Look no further than the Iron Fist, otherwise known as the Punch Power. Upon casting the power, you charge up a melee attack that will knock enemies away from you, creating some safe distance between you and them. If you manage to knock them into a wall, they will be stunned for a short duration. For some added fun, you can also punch objects at people, like trees if you want to get fancy. If buildables are more your thing though, look no further than the remote laser. Upon using the power, a laser cannon is built on the ground, dealing a continuous beam of damage. You can switch it on and off by clicking the button that it is bound to, and you can even pick it up to rotate it to deal more damage. The laser can be really useful at dealing extra damage to bosses, make abyss traversal more difficult for your enemies on air rings, for example, and many more creative things. Definitely a fun power to use, just know that you can kill your teammates with this. Another fun buildable power is the anti-mobility field that places a laser wall that slows down enemies that walk through it and stuns enemies that try to dash through it. It is the ultimate fuck you tool that can even stun enemy ultimates if they hit it right. Honestly, I could see this power becoming purple in the future strictly due to how annoying it is to play against and how much it changes the fight if placed correctly. This is definitely a good pickup for ranged characters and support players alike. Alright, let's get a boring power out of the way with regenerative armor. It does what it says it does. It regenerates 0.6% of your armor per second while being out of combat for 4 seconds. To be honest, I really just do not like this power anymore and would much rather have anything else in a late game scenario. Sometimes it's nice, but it's not something I have for longer than a couple minutes, especially when there are so many other ways to repair your armor or just buying a new one. Supervive's favorite chef, Little Cook, comes up next as a really convenient and handy power that people often sleep on. Upon summoning Little Cook, he will give you a place to brew your vibe for half a minute, but will also drop consumables every 4 seconds for a max total of 8 consumables. This might sound like whatever, but this essentially means that Little Cook has the chance to give you jump pads if you can get lucky, which can absolutely be the difference between a win and a loss the better you get at the game. Introducing the first of the touch powers, we have Touch of Mana. It is really what it sounds like. A passive power where if you touch a teammate, you both get a portion of your mana back. There is a cooldown of 15 seconds, so you can't just keep spamming it. It would be a little overpowered otherwise. Now, you can get around this by just dropping the power and picking it back up, but again, they might patch that. There are 2 other touch powers in the game as well. Even though they are purple, let's just cover them now. They are Touch of Life and Touch of Speed. Again, super self-explanatory as for what they do. The big thing about these powers though is that they can be dished out to multiple teammates, and each player has their own individual cooldown, which can be pretty insane. Again, just keep in mind, if you drop it and pick it back up, it does refresh the cooldown for everyone that you already touched. Now that we have concluded the touch powers, let's move on to Tree Prison. Upon casting the power, the player throws a circle of trees on the designated area that surrounds the center in a prison of trees that take a second to grow, hence the name Tree Prison. While this has obvious uses of trapping enemies, it can also be used to create a line of defense on an angle that you don't want to have to deal with in the late game. Be the Lorax and be one with the trees. So blue powers are strong. But then we get to the purple powers and we begin to see some of the strongest powers in the game, starting with Air Blast that knocks all enemy entities in front of you. I say this because not only does it work on enemy players, it also works on enemy wisps too, which can be super strong and trolly at the same time. Overall, this is a really good power for self-peel. Next, we have the greatest of all time, Abyss Specialist. This power is insane. It is a passive power that resets the cooldown of your dash when it is used over the abyss. This means you can use your dash over the abyss and then reset yourself on land continuously, effectively making it so that you can infinitely dash assuming you have enough mana. Abyss Specialist is an amazing power and could arguably become red in the future, so use it and get comfortable with it how you can. Remember Green Thumb from earlier? Well, now we are talking about the combo maker, the passive power Berry Eater. With this power, whenever you walk into a bush, you eat it, gaining a portion of your HP. On its own, it doesn't sound that good because some areas on the map, like the desert, just straight up don't even have bushes. Here's the thing, combo it with Green Thumb that spawns a ton of bushes around you, and you are now Thanos. Berry Eater also spawns from biome bosses occasionally around Ion Acres that we showed earlier, so it is far easier to get this combo than what people realize. So if you want to be Thanos, that is an option. The next power on the list is one of the craziest powers in the game because it scales in value with how good you are with it than any other power in the game, and that is the Bungee Shot. Upon casting this power, the player fires a projectile that sticks to targets and terrain. If the shot connects, you then have 5 seconds to shoot another projectile that does a multitude of actions. Let's go over these situations. If you hit 2 pieces of terrain, you will create a bungee slingshot that will launch any player that runs into it. This is a great way to get away, to play around, and can even help you pull off some crazy movement techs. Next, if you hit a piece of terrain first and then hit an enemy player, what will happen is that the enemy player will get pulled to that piece of terrain, like a really fast kingpin hook. This can be used to pull people out of position and find picks you otherwise wouldn't be able to find. Players like Venomous that play a lot of Shiv are incredible at this. It's kind of crazy. Finally, if you find a connection on 2 different enemy players, what will happen is they will be pulled into each other, colliding and stunning each other, providing you a short window to decimate them with focused damage. There's probably even more insane tech that you can pull off with this power, but hopefully now you understand how this is one of the craziest powers in the game that you need to start getting good with as soon as possible. Now that you know the potential, all it comes down to is practice. Next up, we have a fan favorite, the grappling hook. Upon casting the power, the player will launch a hook outwards that will pull the player to its location if it connects to a friendly or enemy player, as well as walls. What is even cooler is that if you hit an enemy, it will root them for a period of time based on how far you hit them with the hook. This will force them to stay still, even if they're gliding, setting you up for some sick elimination opportunities. Following the grappling hook, we have the Stealth Cloak, but you'll commonly hear me refer to it as the Mana Cloak simply because of the way it works. It is an active power that grants the player invisibility at the cost of 10 mana per second, at least currently. The main way you want to use this power is to ambush the enemy at the start of a fight, easily taking out one of their players by surprise. This is really good on characters like Kingpin and Jhin, simply because of their assassination potential with their kits. But it is also really good on any hunter if you can get creative enough. Next, we have more purple passive powers, which we are going to all knock out quick, including Delicate Barrier and the Delicate X-Ray Goggles. Delicate Barrier makes it so that when you are at full health, you take 50% less damage on the first half second of damage you take. This power is really good in metas where burst damage is super prevalent and can mean the difference between life or death in some scenarios. It can also work on Oath's shield, which is pretty neat. The Delicate X-Ray Goggles allow you to see moving enemies through walls while you are full health. This is so nice in competitive games like tournaments and scrims, but still useful for ranked 2 if you want to take your enemies by surprise. I love these powers. For the next power, imagine if you had a mini jump pad on a cooldown. but it also heals. That is when you find health packs. At base value, they just heal your friendlies over time, but when you jump and dash into them, you get sent super far, especially on characters like Oath and Celeste. Just look at that range. It makes for some insane engagement opportunities. Nothing is quite as crazy though as the hover wings. I swear on my life that this power is stronger than most red powers in the game. At face value, on activation, the player hovers in the air in a straight direction and can shoot and use abilities at the same time. Pretty simple, right? Well, that is before you realize that air resistance doesn't apply to you when you use this power. This means that on some characters, you can do some pretty crazy movement techs with the power. For example, let's look at Zeph, who can combo hover wings with his M1 to become a rocket that blasts off on its own that gets super amplified when sent through air rings. My suggestion to you is to test out different interactions with this power and see how your character can get value out of it. It is a must pick for at least one player on your team every game. When you find it, I guarantee it. Purple powers keep bringing bangers after bangers with the next passive power, Guardian Angel, also referred to as GA by the larger Supervive community. This power makes it so you revive faster and also applies a lingering revive on friendly wisps, meaning you don't have to stand on them if you don't want to. There's also a red version of this that applies the res effect on boxes as well. Something a lot of players overlook is that if you die with GA in your inventory, you can actually drop the power as a wisp so that your living teammate can pick that power up mid-fight to res you, which is super insane and will almost always take your enemies by surprise if you can pull it off. The two-way teleporter is probably the hardest power to learn in the game outside of bungee shot, but it has some of the most versatility out of any power in the game as well. So when using the power, you can place a teleporter on the designated space around your character that can be used to swap anything that is on one side to the other side, regardless of you being in the teleporter or not. Yes, this means that you can teleport base camps, res beacons, friendly and enemy boxes, friendly and enemy players, trees, bushes, bosses, creeps, the flipping heart, and Kobayashi res. The opportunities are endless. The one thing you can't teleport, to my knowledge, is the gnarled heart. My biggest tip is to go into practice and just try out the power so you aren't completely lost the first time you pick it up. Don't get scared to pick it up just because it's hard to use, because once I started learning it, it has literally won me games. For some players, the two-way teleporter though is just too confusing and difficult, and you just can't be asked. So why not use a tactical fucking nuke instead? Yeah, that's right, you have the launch codes if you pick up this power, and it's pretty darn self-explanatory. Channel the rocket, it launches and impacts after a few seconds, decimating anything in its wake, and leaves a lingering burning field that deals damage over time after impact. Some interesting things to note is that it will break res beacons and will completely destroy enemy base camps when impacting the ground. It also currently one-shots bosses, but that also might get patched. A quick tip to use the nuke better is to not use the power to secure kills with the nuke itself, but instead for enemies to play in places on the map where you want to fight. This could look like launching the nuke behind them and then pushing into them, or waiting until the end of the game where they literally do not have space to run to, so they have to either rotate or die to your nuke. It is also important to note that there is a red version of the nuke that covers a whole lot more space, but this is oddly one of the less powerful red powers, but I digress. Supervive has a lot of cool combat powers, but the cheeky troll powers are also there too. We just haven't covered them yet, which is where Robert Raccoon comes in. When the player activates the power over an area, it will steal any items, powers, souls, and gold in its radius after the 2.5 second channel time is complete. This may sound pretty underwhelming, but think of it like this. You can steal Abyssal Vaults from enemy teams, orange armors from teams. Heck, you can even steal the souls from defeated bosses with this power if you time it right. It is important to note though that you do not steal from the inventory of any players like Abu in Mario Kart. The item has to be on the ground. Use this power to expedite your movement around the map while farming powers from vaults. I can fix her. Well, no, I can't, because she's a 2D character. But you can fix your team up with a dub using the fixer power that allows you to instantly pick up base camps for free, as well as instantly repairing res beacons for free as well. If you ask me, this is pretty handy, but there are some other powers that I would run over it. All in all, it's a pretty solid power, but it's not quite BIS. A really fun power up next is the Glider Boost power, an active power for getaway artists. Essentially, when you use your glide, you can activate a charge to go super fast and create distance between you and your enemies, or close that distance really fast. What a ton of people don't know is that the blast behind you actually does damage, but this will almost never happen because you'll probably just end up getting spiked anyways with your glider out. Last but certainly not least from the purple powers, we have the Sand Wall, which is a power that a lot of people sleep on for how good it is. Upon activating the power, the player launches out a wall of sand that blocks projectiles for a short duration and also applies a movement slow, knocking back enemies for a second. This power can be used as a tool to engage or even as a tool to kite back, offering a ton of agency, which is really important in Supervive as it is a battle royale at the end of the day. The red rarity of items are extremely powerful due to the higher barrier of entry there is to getting these powers, so don't be surprised that they are absolutely crazy. Speaking of crazy, our first red power to discuss is the Blink Stone that teleports the character where their cursor is. This means you can start channeling an attack, blink on top of an enemy, and decimate them. Super simple, super powerful. Next, we have Fate Rewinder, which is essentially a tracer rewind because it rewinds the player to where they were 5 seconds ago with all of the health they previously had. This is super useful because you can essentially take a full fight at no cost since you probably aren't as squishy as a tracer. A crazy passive red power is Armor Shredder that allows all of the player's damage to do 5 times as much to armor than what it normally does. So that orange armor that enemy team had, yeah, it got melted through like a hot knife through butter. You can kiss your 35% damage reduction goodbye. Red powers don't have to just be strong in combat though. Sometimes the utility is just straight up crazy, like Team Frog Jump for example, that will charge up and send the entire team upwards as if they took a jump pad around the player that casts the power. So imagine if you had unlimited jump pads in the late game. That is just so useful for so many different reasons. Another red power with interesting utility is Replicate, that duplicates all items and powers within its radius. It can be confusing how it works though. The power will duplicate armors and items if they are on the player, but will only duplicate powers and consumables and upgrade shards if they are on the ground, at least currently. They might change this really soon in future patches, so just make sure you're reading up on the Learn tab. On top of this, if you try to replicate anything that is red rarity, it will break the replicate after the duplication occurs. Some of this stuff changes from patch to patch, like I said, but know that this power is not one to sleep on, but it isn't the most OP red power either. Next, we have Juggernaut Dash, which essentially launches the player forward quickly, dealing massive damage to destructibles and 500 damage to enemy players, knocking them back. This one, believe it or not, is one of the weaker red powers, but it is still super nice to have as it is essentially a free mobility option. Ever want to fly to the skybox just because? Well, you can do that with Icarus Glide, but if your glide gets too high, you'll start burning at a consistent rate until you die or release the glider button. To be honest, I'm not sure how I feel about this power at this current point in time, but it can be very good for specific types of engagements if you want to get creative. Wisp Vacuum is pretty much just Kirby meets Supervive. When you crouch, you suck all wisps to you, friendly or enemy wisps. It's not great, it's not terrible, but it does create some interesting fights since you do get some guaranteed picks or reses because of it, since people are probably not going to be able to react to it quite yet. Remember the other passive powers that gave mana, move speed, or resist while at full health? Well, the red version of that is Delicate Disguise, which gives the player unlimited invisibility while at full health and out of combat. Pretty easy to understand. Another red power includes the passive Power Shuffler. What this red power does is re-roll the other power in your inventory every single time you use a power. Essentially, the Power Shuffler is every power in one and allows you to get any power you want in the game if you gamble enough. Don't like your ghillie suit? Re-roll it until you get Hover Wings or Blink Dagger. Being able to use Power Shuffler to its limits exemplifies mastery of the power system, and that is why it is going to end our normal list of powers, at least to this point. Now, the reason why I said Power Shuffler is the last of the normal powers is because there are still 3 more red powers, but they don't function like normal red powers. These are the Abyssal Powers that can be randomly found in vaults around the map, but are guaranteed to drop at least one of the 3 at the pink Abyssal Vault on the map. Abyssal Powers are kind of like collecting the pieces of Exodia, as the more you have, the better your passive buff with them gets. When you carry 2 Abyssal Powers across your team, you do double damage to all creeps and bosses, and with 3, you deal double damage to enemy armors, which is a pretty big deal when split across your entire team, mind you. The reason why I don't think the Abyssal Powers are 100% like the Exodia pieces though is because they are actually really strong on their own too. For example, Abyssal Eye is probably the strongest power in the game amongst high level players, as it gives you a radar on cooldown that not only shows you where enemy teams are, but also shows you enemy team colors as well. This is different than normal radar scans that reveal your location while not showing you team colors. Another one of my favorites is Abyssal Fang, which is pretty much a nuke but better. It has a lower cooldown, covers a wider space, spawns a creep to fight with you on impact, and stuns anyone that is hit within its radius. I have had my fair share of clutch res plays with this power, since it also doesn't hurt friendlies like nukes do. Super easy to use and super powerful. The last of the Abyssal powers is the Abyssal Scale, that is essentially OP Air Blast that shoots around the entire player, knocking enemy players away and granting a temporary 300 health shield. And just like that, you have completed the complete guide to Supervive Powers, at least what we have currently. Yay! Good for you! Now subscribe. What I mean to say is now you have all the information you need to win more games in Supervive. Stick around the channel for more guides, gameplay, and the best Supervive content in the game. You know how it is. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments down below, or just shoot me a DM on Discord. The other thing you could do is join me live here on YouTube or Twitch at twitch.tv/PazSwagger. Aside from that, thank you guys all so much for watching, but until next time, I've got to peace out and Paz out. I'll see you in the next one.